that is a chatbot that lives in Slack and is going to do all sorts of exciting things for teams that use Slack. But we sort of see ourselves as, if you forgive me for being nerdy, the like astromech creator of R2D2 or like the Tyrrell company. We want to provide like the underlying personality and skill set for messaging-based applications or bot applications. So we're in the very early days of this. We're, like I said, we're launching next week or in the next couple of weeks.
This is live on TechCrunch.
Hi, TechCrunch.
Okay.
I guess we just launched. So wait, the green button?
Hello.
There we go.
I am so happy to be here today. It is nice to be at such an inclusive event where even robots are welcome. I am here to talk to you today about Howdy, a new customizable bot for Slack teams. Our goal with Howdy is to provide a bot that can automate many of the repetitive and time-consuming tasks that eat up time each week. Our first area of focus is on the daily ritual stand-up meeting. Howdy can be interactively trained inside Slack to conduct custom meetings and information collection tasks. The bot creates documentation of the meetings and stores them securely. You can see that Ben, Katie, and a cute little bot named Howdy have joined the Slack channel together. What will they do? As humans, it is their first instinct to have a meeting. Since we now live in the future, Ben and Katie have a robot to help them make sure that their meeting is productive, and the important intellectual property they create is stored appropriately in their knowledge repository. Because it is a bot, not a human, Howdy can conduct multiple conversations with many different people at the same time. You can see here as Ben has a friendly conversation with the bot. What you cannot see is that at the same time, on the opposite side of the world, the bot is having a similar conversation with Katie. And potentially, thousands of others. Our bots do not get distracted, and can perform multiple tasks at the same time. They record every detail of what is said to them in perfect quality. They are infinitely patient, and also ready at a moment's notice. Ah, look here. The bot is finished with its task. Our knowledge has now been collected, documented, and shared with the group. Do we still need to have that meeting?
So that is the very quick version of what we do. You can actually, what is not in that video is that you can talk to the bot and train it to do other types of tasks, like ask different sets of questions and perform other kinds of tasks. And in the future, we're going to add sort of other building blocks that allow you to tie in other actions that the bot can take based on what the people say.
Bots.
I mean, I was just saying, what's your name? Sorry. Tor. You know, the design of the language is the critical component, I think. You know, we don't have buttons and menus and, you know, dialog boxes to tell the user what they have to do or the choices they have to make. You have a very discrete number of things that you can offer, and you know, you have to communicate what those options are in a very succinct way. You know, it strips back the experience to nothing but text, or nothing but text and a single link or two links. So you have to be a lot more conscientious about what you say and how you say it, and lead the user through that experience in a way that you don't have to when you can show them every single possible option that they have on a, you know, sidebar or menu system.
Who's writing your copy?
We have we just hired actually a writer whose name is Neil Pollack. He's a comedy and sci-fi writer and a journalist. So he's going to be helping us like sort of develop the character of this initial bot and flush it out.
Okay, Nick, one last question.
QA1.
So this looks awesome. I'm just curious if you've thought at all about kind of two ways of accessing this information. So Slack is great synchronously, but sometimes it's hard to catch up. And now, if you've got a conversation with a bot, maybe there's twice as much text happening. Do you think at all about roll-ups, like this bot sending me a digest so that I can sort of check, let's say, once a day of what the summary of the stand-up was, for instance?
Yeah, I actually find the sort of conversation about when notifications are sent very interesting and relevant to us. So we do a couple of different things, like it'll pay attention to when you come online or your status changes on Slack and decide then to deliver you stuff. But we also don't, for what it's worth, we don't do a lot of passive listening, so we're not summarizing what happens, when you're not talking to the bot. You have to explicitly talk to the bot. Does that answer?
Great, thank you. So I think James is going to come up and quickly do the Poncho demo, and then we're going to go into our panel.
Hi. I'm James. I'm creative director here at Betaworks and have been working on Poncho quite a lot over the last few months. For those of you that know or don't know Poncho, it's a weather app that gives you timely and personal weather forecasts that are always funny and relevant and contextual to what you're doing. So we have this phrase that we're calling thin media. So we think, you want to get in and out, get something useful, get something funny, something entertaining, and then get on with your world. So, we don't think, I think a theme we've seen today is like people are not opening apps. We just think people want to get on with their day without getting rained on, and that should just happen without you feeling that you've had to open something. This is a bit. We think that thin content, because it's flexible, will be native to every single platform that's going to come up next, whether that's notifications on a phone, whether that's something on your watch, whether that's something in your glasses or whatever. And we're using weather as a way to get into the millennial audience. I think if you were to ask a millennial, do you want weather information, they would say no. What they actually want is not to get rained on while they're going to work or to wear something too hot and sweaty. So yeah, we call it a thin layer of useful content. We do, up until now, we have done text and email. We haven't done an app because we were waiting for notifications. So right now you get a text with a GIF and a funny forecast. And sometimes we do emoji forecasts, and they've been great. But we're looking at notifications because we think they're really interesting. And one of the things that we thought about was actually one of the only times when you want to be disturbed by a notification is your alarm clock in the morning. So that's a time when you're doing something else and you actually really, really want to be disturbed. So we figured out a really great technical hack that uses the notification system in iOS and then allows us to set a time for that and also play sound. So I'm going to show you a really, really quick demo of what that looks like and then talk a tiny bit more about it. So this is the app. You can set something called Wake Up Weather. Then you have this really cute dial where you can move Poncho's arms to set your clock. And then you exit the app, and even if your phone is off and your sound is off, you'll get a notification. So it says light rain, very morning, such awake. And it plays music, contextual music that's based on the weather. So this is today's weather, which is kind of nice and chilled and maybe a bit rainy. And you can use snooze and stop as you would with an original alarm clock. So this is the only alarm clock type functionality that exists at the moment. The only other one that allows you to sort of wake up with sound is the Apple iOS one. So we've kind of hacked that, which is fun for us. That's what we've been doing at Poncho. We'll have an app out probably in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. Yes, John.
Yeah, I've got obsessed recently with personal weather stations. There's thousands of people, and they're really cheap. And I was also surprised by how bad the software was. And I was actually thinking about you guys. have you thought a little bit about the kind of the enthusiast community around this and the social network of all these people who love sharing their personal weather station data and the micro weather like you have with Dark Skies? I mean, how much are you a weather company and obsessed with that, I guess, and how much are you a notification company?
It's a great question. I mean, we have just changed our editorial system. So the way it works, Poncho, I'll give you a kind of brief background. We have 5 editors that we have regular writers' meetings where we pitch ideas for forecasts. So then what the data does is it clusters all the zip codes around the country. So wherever you are, you feel like you're getting a one-on-one forecast. And even though we only have sort of like 5 writers covering the whole country. So, but what we'll do is we have a really, really active community, and like I think some people will quite often sort of pitch in with ideas for forecasts, if not necessarily this is what's happening in the weather right now. I don't think we're ever going to be like breaking news weather. Like for a hurricane, for example, I think we would say, you know, here, follow these people for the latest updates rather than like follow Poncho for the latest update. I think we'll be an entertainment layer on top of weather rather than like the Dark Skies.
And we use a lot of data from those guys. We work closely with the Dark Skies and a couple of others.
And Weather Underground too. I mean, it's sort of amazing how good the data is and how interesting it is, and like how little has been done with the UI and with the experience with all that, given how much is out there. You know?
Yeah, I mean, we made this because we think actually weather data is in theory really interesting, but the way it gets distributed to most people is really, really bland. And actually people want attitude. They're like craving entertainment. If you get a text that just says it's 73 and sunny, like, you know, what does that actually mean? Like I want to know like what I should wear, or like something cool that's happening in culture, and kind of link that up with the weather itself.
Okay, thank you. So we're now going to move. We've got. Thanks, James. So we're doing this again, Joe. Back. So we have Joe Stump, we have Robert Scoble, and we have Steve Cheney. Steve, there you go. Okay. And you can see that the narrative that we're moving through here, which we've sort of gone back and forth on many a time, but is sort of the evolution of notifications. And Steve and I wanted this group to really talk about how smart contextual data can be used and applied to notifications. So Joe, you know, deep experience on the news side in the old days at Dig, and then at Simple Geo, and thinks about this stuff a lot. Steve Cheney over at Estimote, low power Bluetooth beacons, understanding a network of signals, and then Robert in between these two and in between a lot of the tech trends.
I'll be the moderator, I guess.
Yeah, that only exist on Facebook. Yes, yeah. So take it away.
Can I start? Yeah. So I've been talking a lot about lately. So I wrote a book called Age of Context, and I get to go around and meet cool people like all of you in this room due to my job. And I have started doing a talk called Frictionless. And the best example of where I'm going with this, and it fits into this notification summit, is Topingo. Does anybody here have Topingo? Know Topingo? Probably not, because it's for college kids right now. So if you're a college kid and you wake up at 7 in the morning and you want an iced latte, you go to Topingo and order an iced latte. The system puts an order into a box that sits in the Starbucks. The box lights up, beeps, and spits out a receipt that goes into the workflow of the restaurant. Your phone notification says your latte will be ready at 7:29 a.m. You go and pick up the latte. You don't touch anything. You don't tap anything. You don't talk to anybody. You just pick it up and leave. Sort of like you can do at an Apple store now if you want to buy an accessory. But it goes further. So if John was a student at NYU and he's standing in the Starbucks and he's in my class, it knows all that. And it notifies him, hey John, can you pick up Robert's latte too and take it to class? And if you do so, you'll get some Topingo dollars. So he's using a virtual currency on top of it to pay the delivery system that's being built. and on it goes. So this guy has reduced friction from the UI. Oh, that's where I was going next. He's his dad started Iran. He's an Israeli. He went to the Israeli military and got into the 8200 program, which is where they learn, where the smartest kids get put in that program, and they're surveillance people. And he said in the government surveillance, they noticed that people have a pattern through life, and they're looking for people who are out of the pattern. For instance, if I bought a ton of diesel fuel or a ton of fertilizer and some diesel fuel, somebody is going to visit me because I'm not a farmer and I should not have fertilizer, and I will probably be behaving like Timothy McVeigh did. Actually, I give a talk at the surveillance people in Washington, D.C., and one of the guys afterwards said, we watch the farmer too. We actually watch with a satellite to make sure that they spread the nitrate onto the ground. And if they don't spread the nitrate on the ground, they get a visit as well. But he notices that everybody has a pattern. So after a week, if you use his app, he starts going, hey, would you just like your normal iced latte? Because you bought the same iced latte 5 days in a row. So his system asks that and say yes. So I think his company is the best one that fits into this new notification system and the new frictionless e-commerce play that TAP is talking about across town. So that's where I want to start out. Where are you guys fitting into that? Are you disrupting the world that way?
Well, I guess I'm not really disrupting the world anymore now that Simple Geo is part of Urban Airship. But I like this idea of frictionless, particularly from the point of view that when you kind of cross-section that with context. Like when I think of frictionless, I think of things that not only help me not have to order something, but also we're talking about ambiguity, and not getting things. Like the absence of being annoyed is also a lack of friction. Right, and one of the things that I think we're only starting now to realize is that there's this cross-reference that you are going to have to start doing in these contextual notifications, and understanding what your users care about in that cross-reference is, I think, going to be important moving forward. I don't know if there's nothing necessarily something in the latte experience here. Well, actually, there would be. I know you get a nice latte every single day, but I noticed that today it's an abnormally cold day. Maybe I shouldn't offer you the iced latte. So things like that. That's something that we spent a lot of time at Simple Geo. Actually, we built a whole product called Context, where you give us a latitude and longitude, and we told you all these random contextual things about that place: weather, closest intersections, demographic data, that kind of stuff. And I think that having that latitude and longitude is really going to be the kind of key pivot point, I think, for Context moving forward on these notifications.
I think that's a perfect kind of entry point. So when we think about location data at Estimote, right, we have beacons. We're not a beacon company. We think of ourselves as like a location intelligence platform. It's really provocative to think about where we've come with smartphones today and what they do, right, and what they don't do, actually, more importantly. So we've come to understand that we have this device in our pocket that can, roughly speaking, help us navigate the physical world, open a map, have an Uber car come to our house. And that's all, of course, enabled by these satellites that went in the sky, like I think by the military 20, 30 years ago. And then they became commercial use. And even in 2007, when the iPhone came out, there wasn't really a lot of use for satellites. You could have a Garmin device in your car and use it, but it was like really heavy and it really sucked. So now we depend completely on location, right? And if you look at what actually that means, is it means that smart developers, like Foursquare, right, they use X and Y coordinates and they create amazing applications for consumers based on the developer, themselves, Foursquare developers, not caring about how they get that data. They just assume that the data is going to be pretty good. And of course, we also understand that the data sometimes sucks. It's not great, as evidenced by these heat maps that I think Dennis put up that were really interesting because they show that the signal bleeds way beyond like actually where you physically are. So today now we think we're really cool walking around with these devices. Uber came out with this application that brings a car to your house in 5 minutes. You can order Postmates from your couch. But like, is that the future? And I think like what we ask ourselves is, the location data still is really, really poor. It's extremely bad, right? This room has almost no concept we're in the room. It just generally knows, your phone generally knows that you're nearby. And the reason for that, without going into all the boring details, is that the satellite signals don't penetrate inside buildings, right? So it was really interesting to hear Dennis's answer to when he said he could visualize beacons everywhere, because we obviously love that. We love that visualization, right? The beacons could be everywhere. And it reminded me of one time I got asked by a really smart investor. He said to me over coffee, "Do you see beacons everywhere?" This is like a year and a half ago. And I immediately said, "I don't see them there. I see them here. I see them everywhere on the device."
Yeah.
In other words, if the device were so smart that it understood precisely exactly what you were doing, then the capabilities that you could build into this screen or the watch or whatever is next, whatever interface is next, would absolutely blow your fucking mind, right?
The fact that every iPhone has a beacon in it, and most people don't. And when I give speeches, I ask who has a beacon on them. Nobody raises their hand. And then I ask everybody who has an iPhone, and usually it's 60, 70, 80%, right? And every single iPhone has a beacon in it. It's not turned on.
Yeah,
and I haven't
true.
seen a software developer use the beacon in the phone for anything.
Yeah, we've seen some do it, but I think like whether it's a beacon, a Bluetooth beacon, or whatever it is, the whole concept and idea is your phone doesn't understand what it's doing, and there's a physical limitation around GPS. So what the theory is, right? That smart people think, this includes Facebook, Google, Tencent, Apple, right? The 4 biggest mobile companies in the world have embraced Bluetooth beacons. The thought process is that the sensors, they will proliferate, and eventually it will become easy for the developer to get an X and a Y and a Z coordinate no matter where they are, i.e., aka indoors, no matter what they're doing. So that's what we're obsessed with, is making it simple for the developer to get an X and a Y coordinate. It's an extremely challenging problem, and Google and Apple haven't done it. The Foursquare thought around opening an API for that is an incredible product. But imagine if that product became so precise that you could do that when you're actually in physical environments. It would change retail, and it would change kind of like what we do. And the latte example is a good one, but there's everything we do is predicated on our brain understanding, right away where we are, and the phone doesn't have that connection. So at some point that gap will be closed, and I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
I've got a question on this point in particular around the beacons. There's a ton of people that are proliferating beacons left and right, and I want to go a little bit back to a point you said where the location data is really crappy. Location data is really crappy based on GDP of a country. So the higher the GDP, the better the location data that you can get. You can almost track quality of location data almost directly based on GDP. And what's interesting is the lower GDP nations are also the mobile-led, revolutionary, next-gen economies that are all coming up. How do you see this playing out? Where it's like, I got to roll out beacons across India, China, Brazil. I've been to some of those places, and it's like some of those places don't have electricity. So what are some of the I guess challenges that you see moving forward on even getting this contextual data? It's like, I would love to be in Asia right now and doing startups in Asia right now, because holy crap, there's a couple billion consumers coming online, and they're all doing it through mobile phones. What do you see that is going to need to take place in order to get that contextual data, and who leads that charge?
Money and or a breakthrough. I mean, I got a tour of Levi Stadium where the Super Bowl is going to be held in February, and this is to your point, right? The richest of the rich are going to this thing, right? And they have 2,000 beacons. They have 1,200 Wi-Fi hotspots to get bandwidth into the stadium. They have 40 gigabit into the stadium and out. And they built a really beautiful app. And still, of the 49ers fans who go to the stadium 9 times a year or something like that, 30% only have the app, right? But when you do have the app, he knows everything. He showed me his screens. He knows where you get your ticket, like where you're sitting, right, on your couch, right? He knows when you enter the parking lot, which parking lot you're in. He knows when you walk in the stadium. In fact, they just bought a brand new 4K screen for the Super Bowl. When you walk in the front of the stadium, it's going to say, "Welcome to the stadium, John Borswick," if you give the app a capability to do that. And you're going to think that's cool, right? Because you're going to turn around and take a selfie. Hey, look, I'm at the Super Bowl, and my name's on the screen, right? And it's ticketless entry, right? So you walk through, and there's a system there seeing your phone go through with a ticket. And when you sit down, it knows where you're sitting, and you can order a hot dog straight to your seat, and you can ask it where's the closest bathroom, and there's a sensor in the bathroom to sense how long the lines are, so it takes you to the bathroom where the shortest line is nearest to you, right? So there's fantastic stuff you can do with this, but it costs a lot of money to put this stuff in. 2,000 beacons.
How much are the beacons? Let's just rough ballpark figure. If I want to put in 2,000 beacons in an NFL stadium, what's that going to cost?
They're pretty cheap.
Yeah.
So Ben Evans wrote this post called "The Smartphone is the Sun," and the beacons are just using commodity components that smartphones use.
They're about
sold
$10 a
in
piece.
In the billions. So they're a few dollars. They'll eventually go pretty cheap. The limiter is the chip, which is about $1, and the battery, which you don't want the thing to die too quickly. So, but you could get these sub $1 today. I think to go to your point, the way we think about this, and actually the way that you can witness this, even if you think about what you did 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, is a network effects. And the term that I love, we call system-wide network effects. And a network effect is, of course, when a person, a new individual comes on Twitter, then the service becomes more valuable to every other user. So today we're walking around with smart devices, apps, and OSs, and as the system gets smarter, everyone benefits. And beacons are just one tiny component of this, right? The reality is that what we do and what most smart developers do is they use the sensors on actually the phone, what you're speaking about, to understand if the phone's moving, if it's upside down, if the sensor's getting ambient light, if it hasn't done something. So it's a fusion of all that, right? And it's data science. And when you fuse that together, you get this thing sort of where you level up and you go system-wide network effects, where the whole entire thing becomes incredibly intelligent. So I think to answer your question around these these countries that even went mobile first and probably don't have a lot of capex to build out networks, they actually are building out fast networks, a little bit ironically, faster than the US.
I had much better cell signal in rural Thailand than I've ever had in New York City.
Yeah, and I think because those networks benefit every user, they're going to happen. It's not dependent on throwing beacons everywhere. Of course, these sensors that are attached to walls, the fundamental reason they exist, just to get a little geeky, right, is that they replaced the retina of your eye. Your eyes actually just look for visual light, right? And when it reflects, you understand exactly. I know that monitor is tilted that way and it's 40 feet away. And so your phone just doesn't have the capability to understand that. But what it does is it just starts to reflect non-visible light, which is Bluetooth signals. So it's trying to estimate kind of where they approximately are. So it's actually a really stupid way to do it, but it's the only way that we've discovered yet to make this phone, somewhat aware of what's going on. It's the same as GPS, but it's indoor GPS. So you don't need a million of them everywhere, but in a collection of them can make an environment smarter. This is about how big they are. The ones that we have are fairly small, right? They're pretty small. I think Target is putting 100,000 of these up in their stores. So 100,000 is a lot, but there's also 1,800 Target stores.
What I know that the resolution on GPS I think is 10 feet-ish, which is fine for dropping bombs. Terrible on Z-index. And
when you have pure line of sight, it's great. But we spend 70-80% of our time not with that.
Right,
so, yeah.
right. And the question I have is how much more precise is the resolution, and more importantly, what new contextual information does that greater precision unlock?
Yeah, no, it's a good, perfect question. So Matthew from TechCrunch was saying something to the effect earlier that if you were by your trunk and you kind of got right by the handle, you were going to open your trunk. But if you were a foot away, you probably aren't going to open your trunk, right? So the precision needs to be within inches. This technology is not necessarily meant to replicate what the swiping NFC stuff does, but it still can get that precise. So if you're right next to the beacon with your phone, it can give you a different message or do something special and different than what it would if you're 10 feet away. And I think the ideas that you can think of around that are, again, they blow your mind, right? The smartest developers will take this coordinate or this proximity and build something. Yeah. And sometimes just things happen that we just don't expect. A lot of door makers are using it as a permission control just to know that you have it's what do they call that when you log on to Gmail and you do two-factor authentication? So you can add additional factor of authentication. Why? Because if you're not right by the door and you're a mile away, you probably shouldn't be opening the door, right? So those kind of things become really interesting to make the world better. This is a notification summit, so just to touch on that, I think John Steinberg earlier said something around The first phase of beacons was people kind of abusing it and using them for marketing messages, and it's just so stupid. I mean, if this technology is just for pushing coupons, we've all completely failed. I would have gone home a year ago.
So at Coachella, they had 90 beacons, and he used the geek who built the system there. And Coachella's a big music festival with 200,000 people, and he used it so that you knew where your car was. He used it when you entered the venue, and it said welcome on the app, and he's thinking about ticketless entry. He used it so that as you past art pieces, it would tell you about the art piece and do things like that. And he also used it for marketing, but he said I was very explicit with the brands. They would only get to send one notification to the phone. They wouldn't be able to spam the user. And he really thought deeply about the user experience walking around the field, and so that a user would only get one or two, notifications that are brand messages. Everything else would be useful.
Exactly. I think good location data actually allows you to suppress messages, right? So it allows you to not have false positives of messages that you would have sent out that are just trash. So in effect, what you can get, and location is just one thing. It happens to be what we do. There's plenty of other signals from data you get that have nothing to do with where you are at that point. But it happens to be a lot of them depend on what you're doing then at that moment. And so it's great to suppress a bunch more notifications that you shouldn't be getting. And that's pretty important. It's important kind of on both sides. Does anyone remember the Square Register product that came out 4 years ago when Square was a small company, right? So you had an app, which was their first problem because no one wanted to download the Square app. But if you went to the coffee shops that supported it, then the coffee shop owner would see your face on the coffee shop, and then you as a consumer would check. It's just the stuff we've gotten used to with all these different variants of products that support it today. And it was really funny because the tech sucked, and so what would happen is if you were within a cell tower distance of the coffee shop owner would see your face pop up, right? And the reason is because there was a false positive, and they might send you notification, but both sides had this problem of infidelity.
I still get them at Starbucks. Every time I stop right next to the Starbucks, I get a notification. It really pisses me off. I removed the app because of it.
That limits the developer's creativity because they can't do a lot of these things that they want to do. And so it isn't just about notifying the consumer, but it's about closing attribution or proving that something's happening, proving with a high degree of accuracy something's actually happening. Yeah.
Steve, earlier today, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Earlier today, I forget who it was, they were talking about bundling and unbundling. Were you there for that?
Yeah.
So when you say that what you're focusing on is location, what kinds of bundling are going on with other services that would tend to improve the fidelity?
That's a really good question. So I think if you think about bundling of consumer apps, there's another bundling that in theory would help all of us with apps and services and operating systems. It would be bundling of data, right? And unbundling of data. And when you think about data, people don't want to share data between each other. There's APIs and web services that open up you to allow access to data. The only people that open up APIs to data are people that think they're going to benefit from turning that data into some platform that people use. So one of the problems with not just beacons and placing them, but getting more granular data is that there's no one that's really the arbiter of a lot of where this stuff is going, the funnel of where it's going. On the developer side, there's a few massive companies like Facebook, and then there's obviously Foursquare has a ton of data, even though they're quite a bit smaller. But the two companies that have shit tons of data are Apple and Google, right? And so if you think about from that perspective, they in theory understand what notifications you're interacting with, what you're doing, and having a capability to better bundle some type of notification layer and then give that as access to other apps or developers. So when there was the panel about, is it gonna be some other notification layer, or is Apple or Google gonna do this? It's really provocative because it's probably gonna be Apple or Google that makes the notification layer better and kind of bundles together smart data science and then opens that up in a way that doesn't harm them, but makes eventually all these apps better because the app can get better beacon data or whatever it is. And I think the problem with that is that they have to move on such a slow cadence. They can't introduce some new thing, except every year when a new iOS version comes out. And I think this panel is somewhat about APIs, but to some extent, The reason for that is because, when you make a public API, you can't go and change it later. You can't deprecate some like API endpoint because it breaks the system, and the developer that built something on that is screwed. So when Apple and Google are trying to make like their stuff better, or like just generally like, I think like if it would, your question about bundling, I think bundled data would benefit everybody, but it has to do with these data silos. And it's a really challenging problem, I think, for just the evolution of mobile experiences. And I feel like there's a lot of topics to touch on there, so I'll stop. But I feel like the reason why this stuff hasn't become like easier from like a notification standpoint is, to some extent, Apple can't just radically change the next version of iOS 10, or there'll be user revolt, and they'll kind of like ruin a bunch of stuff that they did before, much what like deprecating an API would do. I don't know if that's too theoretical, but that's my thought on that.
I want to touch on a point that you mentioned, which was the barriers to getting this contextual data. So it's great that you get the latitude and longitude from the phone, and it's great that folks like Dennis have opened up their data sets. But then I remember when we were working at Simple Geo, we wanted to get a reverse geocoder. So I call it Navtech. I'm like, I'd like a reverse geocoder. And they're like, okay, for which country? And I'm like, Japan. And they're like, that's great, we'd like one too. And you basically can't get it in Japan because of the way that they geocode, or the way that they do addresses is around the block in order of which the building was built, right? So normal like geocoder is just a geometry point-to-point line problem, and you can't do that if you can't assume standard numbering on houses, right? And then when I was like, okay, what about a US one? And they're like, well, that's $275,000 a year, and then a per query fee on top of that, and you have to use our software. And this is something that I think goes to your point, that leaves, there's such huge barriers to entry to getting, Dennis mentioned this earlier as well, it's hard to crawl the real world. He has a few million users that are doing it for him. Google has a couple 100,000 cars probably at this point that are doing it for him. And that is a huge capital expenditure. And once you've put that capital expenditure out there, you obviously want to get an ROI. And really, I think what you're saying is in order to get some of this contextual data and to get it at scale for developers, you need to almost have some benevolent third party that is doing it just to move their own ecosystem forward. And that's going to be a real tough challenge, I think, moving forward.
Is that why you see? One of the uses of Estimos is the downtown app. If you're in Palo Alto, there's a cafe called Coupa Cafe, and you used to have to get off your ass and get in line for a new latte, right, or a sandwich, and then come back. And now you open up your iPhone and with your app, and you order your latte right there, and they bring it to you. And there's a Estimo beacon on the table in a box. That's a smaller idea that a normal developer can chew off instead of trying to think about how do I get a beacon in every retail store.
Yeah, but then the problem is you take your bright idea to the VC and they're like, how do you scale this? And you're like, I don't know, the data doesn't exist except for in this one cafe that I rolled out these beacons to.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, let's open up for questions.
Yeah.
Questions?
Contextual data. What's the bleeding edge of contextual data? Anything biomedical coming in that augments where we are?
Man, probably. I mean, as far as the biomed stuff, I don't even think we've begun to even think about scratching the surface on what we could do as far as layering that stuff into location and notifications. Can you imagine this thing reading your stress level basically, and then like the notification comes through that the check bounced, and the bank's like, we're gonna wait. We don't know what's going on right now, but he's got an elevated heart rate. He's sweating his ass off. Probably doesn't really need to know about that bounce check right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about benevolent, Jesus.
I always get a laugh when I point out to audiences that, hey, this thing has an accelerometer, has a heart rate monitor, and a clock. Oh, it knows when we're having sex. And everybody laughs. And nervously not laughs. They're like, oh, yeah, Tim Cook knows when I'm having sex.
That would be the worst thing to feed back into the Tinder profile.
Oh. Okay, questions?
But,
You guys talk a lot about broad scale context, like, you know, maps of Japan or whatever, but I feel like we still underutilize the like little context that we have, like personal context, like I'm sitting on the couch at home, like what's relevant to me right now, or like I just woke up. You know, is anybody, you know, or like the iPhone accelerometer knows if I'm standing, walking, running, or driving. But the only thing I've ever seen used for that is to record that in like Strava. Like, nothing has ever said like, hey, you're taking a walk.
Or even more basic, Waze, for instance, always ask me, are you going to work? Yeah, I'm going to work. But then it reads me the same direction it did yesterday.
Right, or like you're standing outside. The weather up in the sky is this. Like, great, thanks a lot. You know, is there anything interesting using those sort of smaller pieces of like not big data but small data that you guys could speak to, or
other than Google Now?
Google Now. God damn, I love that thing. I'm a total iOS guy, but that thing is probably the most amazing version of what I've seen of what you're talking about. And I think a lot of that goes back to getting that contextual data in aggregate and over time. There are very few people that have that type of data of knowing when you're waking up, when you're going to sleep, when you're having sex, when you're going to the gym, when you're doing this, and when you're doing that, along with the contextual data that they can then cross-reference with that. That's still pretty difficult, and you need to do that to statistical confidences and all this other stuff. So I haven't seen a lot of people do it. I think the best one is probably Google Now that I've seen so far.
I'll throw in another one in there, which is interesting app. And I think we reached out to the people who are doing it. I have them here, but we couldn't get to them. Is Lark, L-A-R-K. And this is an app that came out about a month or two ago. It's a health app. And you know, two things are really interesting about it. One is that it's doing what you're saying. It's trying to do very local data. Second is that it's doing everything is in a conversational interface. And so you're basically talking to bots, a world which you'd like. And it's highly conversational, and it's asking you, so, hey, you got up at, you had 6 hours sleep last night. That's more than normal. Do you feel better or less than normal? Do you feel worse? What do you have for breakfast, et cetera, et cetera. So it's doing sort of quantitative self stuff, but through a highly conversational interface that resembles texting.
Yeah, I love Lark. I mean, just calling back to one of the earlier conversations, like I feel like there's an opportunity missed when I come home, it's 7 o'clock, I open my phone, and then the news apps could say, well, do you want to read some news? Like, you're in a casual situation here, right? It's not like big data context, it's just like common sense context that I feel like is just completely wasted, for the most part.
If Facebook's news feed is giving me a little bit more entertainment stuff in the evening than in the morning, more funny videos in the evening, where in the morning it's more business news, right? It's partly because all of you are putting more business news and clicking like on business news in the morning and clicking like on the cat photos in the evening, right? So,
I think, Anders, do you have a question?
Maybe more. So one question is about this is, maybe it's more philosophical. So with all this sort of data gathering and these predictive services, where does that leave us with serendipity? So that's just a thought, that I'm wondering about. And then as what you brought up, I thought was interesting because it's maybe what we need in a lot of these situations is actually like a first question or 2 questions before we launch into giving something. Like we actually need to know that sort of like, well, how are you feeling and what are you interested in before we launch into like providing you something.
I'm not too worried about serendipity because there's always alcohol in bars.
It's interesting you bring up this kind of ask questions, and John brought it up as well with this other app. And this is the 3rd time that I've heard in the last week or so that people are starting to look at effectively a user experience around a decision tree, where the very initial entry point to the UI is a couple of questions, where the app's asking you a couple of contextual questions, and that sends you down different routes in the decision tree. And the other thing that's been kind of interesting about notifications, I just kind of noticed this when you mentioned this, is that the rise of the conversational UI, you can almost track that with bots and notifications. I've been seeing that over and over and over again. I mean, my SmartThings home, like I chat with my home in the SmartThings app. It's totally ridiculous, I think, but
I just
that's
was talking
what it
to
does.
Adam Chire, who invented Siri. He's working on a new company called Viv, and he's building an audio operating system to talk to your world, your car, your home, your phone, your watch.
I think Echo, they've started releasing APIs for Echo as well, and SmartThings now you can plug SmartThings into Echo and tell it to do things.
How many people here have an Amazon Echo? Do you like it?
Yeah.
Every single time I ask that question, everybody who has one says they love it. And
in a weird way, though. Like,
but tell me why.
Well, because I don't use it for the stuff like adding groceries to my wish list or whatever. We talk to it to play music and ask, factual questions, and my kid uses it a lot. Like, she can play music. She's 3 years old. She wants to listen to Robin. She tells it to play Robin, and it like patiently does it in a way that an iPhone or a graphical interface would never do.
Do you use it to time cooking? Like
Yeah,
burners?
timing cooking.
I wish it was even more granular on that. Alexa set the oven timer for 3 minutes or whatever, right?
April.
Question for you guys, April Underwood from Slack. I sometimes wonder if the fact that we haven't really come up with a better model than advertising to monetize a lot of these consumer experiences is actually what's holding us back from putting all this to work. Like the data is being collected. People are figuring out smart things to do with it, but it's kind of like it's the golden goose. It's the only thing left to potentially be competitive in driving in a highly competitive performance advertising driven market. So I'm just curious if you feel like product companies are intentionally or unintentionally sort of holding themselves back from actually building great products around these signals.
It's coming. I interviewed the CEO of Hello Alfred, which is a butler. It's $100 a month, and it has 91% retention rate, and it's available here in New York and Boston. And so her customers love the service, and Facebook is trying to do M with Messenger, where you're going to talk to the system and ask it to do things, and it's going to be a human being on the other side for a while until it figures out the average common question, and it'll turn those into algorithms. But we're going to probably pay for those services like we pay for Alfred. Alfred sounds very fantastic, and it sounds like it's well worth the $100 a month to their customers. I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, I think there was somebody earlier said there was two things you can monetize off: entertainment and efficiency, right? And there was this blog post a few years ago. It was Josh Kopelman said he called it "Killing Time and Saving Time." It's a really good blog post, which is the same thing: killing time is entertainment, saving time is efficiency. So I think that ads just don't help you be efficient. Things like e-com does and like on-demand economy do. So most of what we're doing on mobile now, I think, is oriented, like people are willing to pay a premium to take some something off the shelf a mile away, or like New York, like a quarter mile away, and pay like a courier $4.99 Postmates to bring it.
In San Francisco, getting a salad from Sprague is $10 in 20 minutes.
It's like remarkable how much inefficiency there is in the supply chain, but those kind of things people are willing to pay for. So I'm pretty bullish on ads kind of changing, going away. And obviously there's not very many companies that have been successful with ads, right? I mean, there's Google and Facebook. Twitter is not. And so I think that we'll see a lot of new things in local commerce and in e-commerce that help us just enjoy our lives better than see more ads. Dennis, do you have a question?
Amazon just today announced more dash buttons. I don't know do you guys who have the Echoes, do you have dash buttons as well, where you push a Tide button and a box of Tide shows up in 2 days, something like that, right? Those are cool buttons.
Yeah, I have one observation and one question.
Yeah.
Observation was like everyone's talking about how do you get these little nuanced pieces of data from users. Jesse, I just saw you were here. Jesse and I used to work at a startup called Vindigo way back in the day. Before there were phones, before there were Palm Pilot, no GPS, Trio, Palm Pilot, whatever. But these guys at Vindigo, the guys that started it, and we just worked there, it's like in the absence of GPS, just ask the user to tell you where they were. And you would say, I'm at the corner of Broadway and West 4th. And okay, that was your hacked way of getting GPS coordinates. And like we basically stole that trick when we did Dodgeball. We wanted to make these awesome services that knew where everyone was, and there was no GPS. So it's like just ask the user to tell you. So I'm at Ace Bar, and then we stole the same trick with Foursquare. Just ask the user, and they will tap it on a list. And I think Google has spoiled everyone to the point where it should just know. Like you should never have to interact. You should never have to ask a question. But for a lot of the stuff, like how am I feeling? What should be going on next? What do you want to do next? Like you can always just ask the user, and a lot of times they'll just give you the data. Like if you just ask them these little micro questions, you can glean a lot from it. So I don't know. As I'm listening to a lot of people in this room talk about, man, I can't wait until we can figure out this exact context. Like you can always just ask and get it.
Yeah, you can crowdsource it too. Like you can ask the user to do something else. Like if a on-demand shopper is shopping in a grocery store, and imagine like there's like location intelligence stuff in there.
Yeah.
Then you could ask them, AKA when they like pick the lettuce up, they check it off in the app, and then it kind of crowdsources. Oh, that's where the lettuce is in the store, right?
Yeah.
So you could, I think there's like because the feedback loop on mobile is so much more quick than it used to be. And there's so many services to do that versus when you guys hacked it. I think that's really creative, yeah.
The question I had for you guys is like, what do you guys think the developer ecosystem is going to look like for this stuff, right? So, for Foursquare, we want to open up that SDK so that you can ask us, you can ask Foursquare, what neighborhood is this user in? How familiar are they with this neighborhood? Are they inside a coffee shop, yes or no? And we'll give you those answers. But are you going to ask that to 50 different apps if you want to know, is this person running or walking? Is this person at their home or not? Is this person having sex right now or not? Are those going to be, does everyone have to write their own algorithms for that thing? Or will each app report into some central database, like Fire Eagle was doing 100 years ago? And then you just query that central repository? Or how do you think that's going to evolve?
I think some of that's kind of happening with, HealthKit is that right there, right? All the apps report into this central repository. That's a great question. I think that, again, you're in a position where the only people that can really probably pull that off are Google and the people that own the actual phone and at that level sometimes. The thing that I always worry about when it's not those two doing those aggregate services like that is the TOS shutdown. Like Google's going to always let you do that. But then iOS comes out and is like, well, we don't want 50 apps reporting when you're having sex to some person who is not us. And so the aggregate stuff on the developer ecosystem is kind of, I always struggle with it because it's just, you kind of wait for either Apple or Google to come in and do it themselves, or Apple decides for some reason that it's, against their ethos on privacy.
Yeah. There's not even anybody who's looking at the calendar data on my Apple Calendar, Google Calendar. Right? If you knew that, you wouldn't be bothering me with notifications while I'm in a meeting. You would hold those notifications until after the meeting and then spray them to me, right? We're still not even in the early days yet of this stuff.
I think it's pretty messy. To your question, there's going to be, I think, a combination of services. And I think what Apple does well in supporting developers and what Android fails at, frankly, is they just make it easier to get a core location fix and to get sensor data from the M7, and it's still a little hard, but if you're a developer on iOS, the experience is superior than developing on Android because of the fragmentation and you have no idea what handset they have and all the other issues. But maybe there's a few places you go for that, and if you could build stuff on Foursquare that took your reliability up for any given thing from 70% to 95% or something, then you would completely change what you would deliver to the user, right? I think it's a bit messy and it's going to be for a long time.
We're gonna wrap.
Okay, can I just make one more point? On Siri, I asked Adam, why can't I ask Siri who is checked in at betaworks on Foursquare? Foursquare has an answer to that. It has an API to that. Siri's not hooked up to the API. There needs to be a marketplace where you're incented to hook up your API into this thing, and Siri has to have a marketplace where it's easy to do that, and it doesn't exist yet. So.
Anyone play with Siri?
Yes. Okay, on that note, we're going to flip now. I'm going to ask Lyndon, John, and Josh to come on up, and we're going to jump right into the next one.
Thank you.
Guys.